Because of the wildly disparate topics covered on the Week I Review, I have learned very little about what my audience is in the year and change that I've been doing this. I don't have any idea what's going to do well, what people are going to like, any of those things you might want to know if you are trying to be serious about your YouTube channel success. But I've learned one thing. Comedy fans are the worst, and male comedy fans in particular. I can always be sure when I post a video tagged comedy special that whatever feelings I may have about the subject, there will be a band of small, sad, mostly boys who feel deep in the blackness of their soul like I should really care about their bad opinion on the matter. I don't. But YouTube loves it, some haters. So engage away, guys. Likes, dislikes, it's all the same to the algorithm. Hello, by the way, and welcome to the Week I Review. You can call me a guy who quite enjoys the New York Comedy Festival. And today, I am talking about Tom Segura's currently touring comedy hour, Take It Down. I've been a general fan of Segura's since I first saw Completely Normal back in 2014. I liked him more when Mostly Stories followed 2 years later, and last year's Disgraceful was his best yet. I've also watched all of his appearances on First We Feast. I have not, however, listened to Your Mom's House, the podcast that he hosts with his wife, Christina P. Maybe it's good. I don't know. Certainly a large, or at least highly vocal, portion of the audience at the Beacon Theater this past Thursday thought so. He came out to a low, droning swoo from the crowd, and I immediately felt weird as hell, kind of like I do anytime I'm in an overtly religious institution and I suddenly realize I'm the only one who doesn't have the words of the call-in response like carved into my bicep or whatever. So the show actually began with an explanation for the rest of us. And you know what? Pretty funny that the LAPD got involved in his plan to appropriate a gang call-out for financial gain, but I'm still not going to listen to the podcast. I think quote-unquote edgy comedy has become really interesting in the past couple of years because of the way that current events have split the art form between people like Anthony Jeselnik and Daniel Sloss, whose genuinely incredible Special X just hit HBO a week ago, and you should absolutely go watch that. I guess Netflix wimped out. I don't know. Their loss. Don't let it be yours. And snowflakes who think the concept of being triggered is inherently funny, which it's not. You can make it funny, if you're funny. But the kind of people who try tend not to be. Honestly, the latter group has nothing of value to say, so I don't really have anything to say about them. But the former has been fascinating to watch because you can basically track in real time as their comedy is being shaped by the world without losing its edge. They change what they talk about, not because they're not allowed #cancel culture, whatever, but because things change. What's funny changes, and people who refuse to change with it are just fucking boring. Tom Segura's changed. Take It Down makes that very clear. In an earlier special, he has a bit about the word retarded, that he misses being able to use it to describe people and situations, yada yada, stop me if you've heard that before. But when he returns to the subject here with an initial setup that almost sounded like he was just going to be doing an old joke again, turns out the context has radically changed. There's no more lamenting, and he doesn't even say it. It's the R word now. And he's talking about the education he received vis-a-vis that term and how it has informed his thinking. And good for him. If only more comedians were willing to own up to shit like that. And while that's an atypically explicit example of growth, you can hear it in other ways across his specials. I went back over the past week and rewatched those first 3 Netflix shows, and there's a pretty interesting line between Mostly Stories and Disgraceful, where his jokes became less what he would call racial, particularly as they pertain to races that he's not a part of. This coincided with him beginning to talk about the fact that he is half Peruvian, which adds an interesting wrinkle to his white guy shtick. He's got some clear blind spots, particularly around issues of gender identity when you get out of the binary. But what's frustrating to me, a binary as hell cis dude, is that the joke he makes about that is just lazy. It's the same one that every other comedian makes. What? People want to go by shoelace? Come on, man. Though at least it came alongside a nice sentiment when he said he would be glad to call them that, or whatever else they wanted, because it's about basic human decency. But the hilarity that most of his observations brought was just missing from that one, because it's not an interesting or new take. He's better than that. And he's better because of everything else in the show. Heck, that R-word bit has some beautiful payoff, especially if you've seen his last special, and the callback to it later on got one of the biggest laughs of the night. At a few points in the show, Segura paused the punchlines to just talk about the way he views the world. Sometimes I cared about that more than others, but it was when he decided to comment on the fundamental idea of comedic offensiveness that my ears perked up. Because I had already been thinking about this since I had rewatched his episode of Hot Ones earlier that day. Sean Evans asked a question about Segura's feelings on non-comedians' feelings on jokes, and Segura's response was one that I felt missed the actual reason why a lot of people get mad about jokes. He said,
"You don't get to decide as a viewer or a writer or a reviewer what the person's intent was who wrote and performed that joke. You don't get to decide that. Deciding that for them because you're like, this is how it affected me, therefore I get to decide, is complete nonsense."
And I don't really buy this argument, though I'll admit my own opinions on it are a bit muddled. This comes up in politics a lot in a really irritating way. People saying they don't know what's in X person's heart, and so they can't speak to the true meaning of his words. But sometimes you actually can know why someone said something. To pretend like it's impossible to see the deeper meaning is ludicrous. But even if you couldn't, even if there were no circumstances under which you could understand a comment's intent without it being explicitly explained, does it really make a difference? Look, I am 100% with him on what he says after that about how much it sucks to have your work taken out of context. Hell, some years ago, I was the target of a hatchet job by a now disgraced right-wing commentator over a clearly intentional misrepresentation of something that I had written. And that was one of the more stressful days of my life. But even in the full context, people will get offended, and they won't care why you said a thing. And they don't really have to. Indeed, what Segura says about this a year plus later is a bit more nuanced. Comedians are allowed to say offensive things, and people who hear them are allowed to be offended. And comedians who decide to go down that road have to be willing to accept criticism for their choices. To think that they are somehow above it all because comedy is stupid. And if they can't take it, they should get a different job. Of course, this is separate from the idea of canceling, as far as he's concerned. Just because someone is allowed to have feelings and those feelings are valid doesn't mean that those feelings get to have a real world impact any more than the original person's words did. But I don't think it is so cut and dried. To give a recent real world example, SNL fired that one guy for saying racist and homophobic things. He whined about it, claiming that they were jokes. If they were, he's a garbage comedian because they just weren't funny. But it doesn't really matter what's in his heart or why he said it. What matters is what he said and how it relates to the purported ideals of his would-be employer. That guy is now infinitely more famous than he would have been if he were just on the show for one season, never put into a sketch, and then unceremoniously dropped from the roster. But SNL did the right thing. What was I talking about? Oh, right. Tom Segura. Look, I have no inherent problem with boundary pushing punchlines, or even ones that are straight up offensive. Societal norms are often excessively limiting, and speaking truth to power requires hurting some feelings. Transgressive comedy, done right, is a societal good. And while I'm loath to say that Take It Down is good for society, I also can't say it's not. 7.9 out of 10. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you particularly to my patrons, my mom, Hamry and Marco, Kat Saracata, Benjamin Schiff, Anthony Cole, at Blasian FMA, and Magnolia Denton. If you like this video, great. If not, I'm sorry. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe. I hope to see you next week.